All right, let's dive into a really fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty provocative idea. We're going to be unpacking the arguments from Jason Brennan's book, Against Democracy. And yeah, it challenges one of the most basic beliefs many of us hold, that democracy is always the best way to go. So let's get into it. So, Brennan kicks things off with this really startling fact from history. It's 1964, the world is literally on the edge of nuclear war during the Cold War, and a majority of American voters had no idea that the Soviet Union wasn't part of NATO, the very alliance created to oppose them. This just immediately raises a super uncomfortable question, right? If voters don't know the absolute basics, how can we expect them to make good choices on incredibly complex issues? Now, the point here isn't that people are unintelligent. Not at all. It's that we're all busy, we have lives, and we respond to incentives. Brennan argues that for most of us, it's actually rational to be ignorant about politics. I mean, think about it. The amount of time and energy it takes to get truly informed is huge. And the personal payoff for doing all that work? Well, the payoff is basically zero. This number, 1 in a million, is the most optimistic chance your single vote has of actually being the tiebreaker in a big election. So, when the potential benefit is that tiny, but the cost of becoming an expert is so high, most of us make a perfectly rational choice. We just stay uninformed. Brennan uses this great analogy to explain what's going on. Think about air pollution. Me personally choosing to drive my car doesn't cause smog, right? It's just one car. But when millions of us all make that same individually rational choice, the collective result is a city choked with pollution. The argument is that voting works the exact same way. One uninformed vote is pretty harmless, but an entire electorate of uninformed voters, that can lead to some truly disastrous policy decisions. So, if we accept that voters are rationally ignorant, what does that actually look like in the real world? Well, the book breaks down citizens into three pretty memorable types. First up, we have the hobbits. And yeah, just like their namesakes, they'd really rather just be left alone to tend to their own gardens. They don't follow politics, they don't really have strong opinions one way or the other, and they're much more focused on their own private lives. They're mostly just apathetic and disengaged. Then you've got the hooligans. Now these are the political superfans. For a hooligan, politics isn't about figuring out the truth, it's a team sport. They cheer for their side, they see all new information through a partisan filter, and they treat the other side like the enemy. The goal isn't to be right, it's for their team to win. And finally, there's the ideal, the Vulcan. A Vulcan approaches politics like a scientist. They weigh all the evidence coolly and dispassionately, they change their views when new facts come in, and they have zero emotional attachment to their beliefs. But, as Brennan himself points out, this is a pure ideal. No actual human is a perfect Vulcan. This chart just nails the problem. For a hooligan, information is all about defending their identity. For a Vulcan, it's about getting to the truth. And here's the book's really troubling conclusion. Most people who are politically active tend to behave a lot more like hooligans than they do like Vulcans. Okay, so this whole diagnosis of the problem, this leads us to a really powerful moral argument. We're shifting gears a little bit from a practical problem to a question of justice and individual rights. To really make his point, Brennan asks us to think about a high-stakes decision completely outside of politics. So imagine you're on trial for your life. What kind of jury do you think you have a right to? We would all agree that being judged by any of these juries would be a massive injustice. And the key thing here is that the injustice is in the process. You see, even if an irrational jury that used a Ouija board somehow stumbled into the correct verdict, their decision has no moral authority. This suggests we have a fundamental right to a competent decision-making process. So Brennan takes that exact same logic and applies it to the entire electorate. He argues that just like we have a right to a competent jury, we have a right not to be subjected to high-stakes political decisions made by an incompetent electorate. This idea is what he calls the anti-authority tenet. So if democracy is so flawed by this widespread incompetence, what's the alternative? This question leads us straight to the book's most controversial proposal. The alternative is called epistocracy. It comes from the Greek words episteme, which means knowledge, and kratos, which means rule. So, put simply, it just means rule of the knowledgeable. Now, epistocracy isn't just one single idea. Brennan actually outlines a few different ways it could work. For instance, with plural voting, everyone still gets a vote, but citizens who are more knowledgeable, maybe they have more education or pass a test, they get extra votes. Or there's the enfranchisement lottery, where a random group of citizens is selected, and then they earn the right to vote by going through some competence-building exercises. You could even have an epistocratic veto, where a democratic government runs like normal, but there's an expert council that can block laws that are unjust or incompetent.
Brennan is really careful to say that the justification for any of this isn't about looking down on people or creating a ruling class of elites. The argument is purely about consequences. It's about protecting all citizens, especially the most vulnerable among us, from the very real harm caused by bad political decisions.
And all of this leads to the fundamental conflict at the very heart of the book, a real dilemma that, frankly, has no easy answers. This is the really unsettling question that Brennan leaves us with. Which is more unjust? Denying some citizens an equal say in government, or allowing an incompetent majority to rule over everyone? Against Democracy doesn't pretend to have an easy answer. Instead, it really challenges us to confront a difficult question. Is our deep, abiding faith in democracy really as justified as we think it is?